I think we all agree that Africa is in a bit of a state economically, socio-economically. We're suffering from the effects of government instability, current coups are taking place even right now, poverty, human rights abuse, and what have you. And we've had this Agenda 2063 as a framework of the African Union to try and bring the Africa that we actually want in place. And that was actually built on the different development agendas, Lagos Action, and what have you in the past. Now, how can we get to the Africa that we want? The Africa we want would require a significant amount of funds, as well as the provision of a conducive environment where the population can thrive. And this will, of course, require a reversal in illicit financial flows. And if you look at it historically, um, in 4 decades or 38 years, between 1970 and 2008, Africa is estimated to have lost 1.8 billion trillion, sorry, 1.8 trillion US dollars to illicit financial flows. This is a continent that's economically weak right now and highly indebted. So that's where the anger is. That's why is a wealthy continent immersed in such poverty and such chaos. And so the recovery and the return of stolen African assets from foreign jurisdictions is, of course, a key element of the general anti-corruption regime, and of course now a priority for the African Union as it seeks to address the challenges that we have on this continent. Next, please. Now, UNCTAD's 2020 report states that Africa is losing $88.6 billion annually to illicit financial flows. You would find different figures because we don't know really. They're all guesstimates as to actually how much has been stolen from the continent. So the figures could be much higher and it could be slightly lower, but all we do see is that there is chaos and there's a need to change things around. And when we're talking about the stolen assets that we're trying to recover, it's a lot of money from abuse of office by politically exposed persons, criminal activities, money laundering. We also have trade invoicing. Multinationals operating in Africa also misuse the opportunity, the weak laws, corruption-prone environment to cause even more financial havoc on the continent. And of course, some of the stolen assets that we're looking at include money stolen to bank accounts, investment funds, minerals, artifacts, artwork, vehicles. I mean, it's kind of open-ended in many ways. And basically, what we do all, I think, agree on generally, is that the illicit financial flows that Africa is currently suffering under is a huge hurdle to either to achieving the UN SDGs as well as the AU's Agenda 2063, as social inequalities continue to worsen and the resources that the continent actually needs for sustainable development are just not there. We'll spoke in detail about the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, and of course there's a framework, provides a decent legal framework for the return of stolen assets, and it's the first international treaty to allow this kind of recovery, the recovery of proceedings from other countries. To prevention international cooperation, as well as the African Development Economic Commission for Africa. So a lot of high-level work went into the development of this agenda. And the agenda is a very important agenda. We have a continent that's in deep crisis, and we would like to lift it up. Of the continent to a situation of inclusive growth and sustainable development, which are all laudable things that I think most people all think should happen. And how do we achieve it? And that's where some of the problems arise. The agenda itself has supported by the AU's vision, aspirations are clearly articulated, 70 goals, 39 priority areas, targets, and it has, very importantly, provided some kind of means to implement, because a lot of the problems we've had in Africa, not just at the continental level, also within the national level, is this problem of implementation. How do we get our well-designed and beautiful-looking plans to the end goal, which is the actual achievements? And one of the good things I think the AU Agenda 2063 contains is the monitoring and evaluation regime to ensure that the different stakeholders actually perform their tasks, and member countries can actually measure where they are. Now, okay, just go forward. Yes, just a little bit back, please. Thank you. About the Agenda 2063, just a pictorial representation. 7 key aspirations are there, and ultimately, no one can quarrel with any of the aspirations. We want to prosperous Africa, peaceful Africa, and development is provided within the kind of people-driven context, because the agenda required a lot of inputs from a very wide variety of stakeholders, of people, to give it some kind of a bottom-up, as opposed to be a top-down approach to development. And of course, the third aspiration talks about good governance, democracy, human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Next slide, please. Don't work in relation to stolen assets recovery. I mentioned the anti-corruption convention, as well as other policy-driven instruments that the AU has sought to provide within its own framework, within its own laws. The AU's special declaration on illicit financial flows in January 2015 kind of set up the financial resources that have been lost to Africa through illicit capital flight, because the funds, of course, were urgently needed to develop Africa. High-level panel, we can utilize the stolen wealth to use Africa. Also, it directed the African Union Commission, as well as member states, to mount diplomatic and media pressure for the return of the stolen assets. And then we have the Nouakchott Declaration, the African Anti-Corruption Year in July of 2018, which also calls for an efficient recovery and return of stolen assets. Very importantly, while respecting state sovereignty, because we will see that because a lot of the assets in the destination countries are within the developed countries. How does Africa show that it has the capacity, the will to act in its own national interests? That's why the issues of state sovereignty is actually quite important when we're talking about stolen assets. President Buhari from the Federal Republic of Nigeria reports July 13 emphasized for completion recovery of stolen housed foreign jurisdictions, and CAPA has been is a major advance when we talk stolen asset recovery, because we know that when African countries come together on the AU, we can drive a better diplomatic bargain when all the countries are speaking with one voice. Hence the common African position on assets recovery. Importantly, CAPA was unanimously adopted by the heads of states and government. CAPA beyond its acceptability just to the politicians, because it's looking that we should look at our history, politics, and socioeconomic conditions, especially when we talk about how under colonialism, significant and very, very important items of cultural value and artifacts, artwork, and so forth had been stolen from African countries, and the return of these important objects is all part of the kind of confidence I think the African people should have in themselves. And CAPA is essentially a tool, an important tool, I believe, for implementing anti-illicit financial flows. And to put it mildly, to put it simply, development would be next to impossible if Africa continues to lose its financial resources. That is the principal legal and technical instruments for reversing illicit financial flows and ensuring the recovery and return of the assets that belong to Africa. It's as if Africa that owns the items, at least the stolen items, we to some extent almost begging for the return of its property, because these properties are legitimately, of course, they belong to Africa. The priorities set out for assets. And first, we're talking about the detection and identification of assets. That's always been very difficult. A lot of these were stolen. Of course, they were hidden away, and they were hidden away in and using it as a tool, innovate is something that CAPA looks into. But in order to achieve proper detection and identification of the assets, we find that there's a need.
7 minutes.
I'm sorry?
We have 7 minutes left.
Oh my God. There's a need to basically encourage a stronger domestic regime. And while the owner of the source countries have no access to the benefits of this access. So there's a need to have a simplified legal regime and technical regime that would actually work. It's too easy to say it's a complex regime. It is complex because that's what it is right now. It can be simplified. I think DG spoke about management of recovered assets. It's very important to African countries. The thought is that you should not get your property back because you will mismanage it or promptly steal it. It's a matter of sovereignty that the countries should get back their assets because they're the legitimate owners of these assets. And the issue as an international community is a key aspect of getting back the resources that has been stolen from Africa. Now, I would argue that asset recovery is visible, high-level policy in Africa right now is basically at the top of the Agenda 2063. You don't find necessarily a strong linkage in the monies to be recovered being pushed into the agenda for development. But that said, CAPA is ongoing. Its full benefits are yet to be realized, of course. More governments will continue to introduce asset recovery laws. As Madam actually said as well, the data is very, very difficult to find in terms of the countries instituting new laws and as well as putting up new institutions. But we all know that countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Mali have recovered stolen assets from foreign jurisdictions, and some are allegedly within a recovery process at the moment. And as part of the engagement process, we can see CAPA working in line with being on side events of the UN anti-corruption convention conference, as well as the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. This is particularly important because I think the global conference on the EITI took place in Africa for the first time, even though most of the countries involved in the EITI process are mostly African countries. Is the continent that loses assets from theft. But we've had 2 decades after the African Union's Anti-Corruption Convention. Some progress has been made, but as I've said, no strong linkages with the agenda for Agenda 2063. Moving on. But what are the key challenges? I said we all know it's a very complex process to recover your money. A lot of it being looted by politically exposed persons at the highest levels. The issues of financial loss of public trust has been mentioned earlier. But the fact is this, that the current global system enables illicit financial flows, and that's what has to be tackled. The absence of data means that there's no universal methodology to monitor illicit financial flows. The 2030 vision for Africa. Now, CAPA, Civil Society Network, has also recently opined that international cooperation, of course, is essential, as well as national legislative and institutional reforms, which remain inadequate. What I'm going to say is that EU's attempts is so dependent on developed countries that actually control the financial flows. The developed countries are the places where these monies have been hidden. So all of this will impact on Agenda 2063. So in conclusion, if Africa is to develop, there's an urgent need to reverse illicit financial flows and then ensure and provide mechanisms to start required at 2063. Is a very, but it's still less than 3 years old. And there's still a need. Transport is really very important. I still think I'm relatively optimistic that in the medium term, maybe 5, 10 years, it's just a projection on my part, because I mean, if you don't have data, it all depends on how well the African continent, the AU, the diplomatic activities, the engagement, civil society, and the media are able to get the developed to pay attention to illicit financial flows. So CAPA does have the potential to lead to a better, a more holistic global legal framework.